Hey everyone. I usually have to, when I start a video, check my hair in the viewfinder, and then I forget to look into the camera because I get distracted by myself. If I keep doing YouTube videos, I think I'm going to have to get a more high-tech setup. I think that I should have a tripod that doesn't wiggle, and because this selfie stick, I'm just holding it up basically, and and I have a tendency. I mean, I don't have much room on my phone because I saved all my videos from my travels on it, and so I have room for like one video. So I upload it and then I delete it from my phone. So if YouTube decides that my content is offensive or something, I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have no backup basically. So I don't know what I'll do about that. I suppose I think maybe I have some stuff on Google. So worst case scenario, I can go back there and um, you know edit or something if I learn how to edit. So that's another thing that I'll have to do at some point. I really don't want to get a laptop and have to lug it around because I'm kind of on the move right now. So I don't want to have a lot of equipment that I have to worry about carrying and also possibly getting stolen. So because when you travel around the world, there's so much stuff to remember. Not just your passport and your money. If you have kind of technology that you rely on to, do all your financial things and all your plans are kept there, and you have multiple phone numbers usually, so it's quite confusing. And I like to kind of keep it all in one place if possible. So yeah, I was going to tell you about a paranormal experience. Um, Basically, like, there's a tradition in the state where I lived in India, which is Himachal Pradesh, which is kind of it's the foothills of the Himalayas. The Himalayas stretch over Tibet and Nepal, parts of China, and I believe Bhutan, and parts of India. And basically, when people think of Hinduism, they tend to think of like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv, and like the Trinity, the creator, the maintainer, and the destroyer. And I think that a lot of neo pagans regard Hinduism as sort of pagan friendly, but if you talk to Indians, they don't really like the word pagan, and they associate it either with the Christian prejudice, which is like Satanism quite often, or they associate it with kind of a tribal religion, which like seems sort of unsophisticated to their mind. So they don't. They generally, when I've spoken to devout, sort of Orthodox, I guess you could say, Hindus, they don't really like to categorize Hinduism as pagan. And there are things in Hinduism that I think are not pagan, um, without going into too much detail. But basically, when I lived in Himachal Pradesh, I noticed that it's sort of like very loosely Hindu, but those tribes were isolated for so long, and they, I don't know if they developed out of Hinduism or if they had always been their own kind of unique tradition, but there are some practices which go on in Himachal Pradesh which are decidedly more reminiscent of Celtic Druids than Brahmin Hindus. Um, anyway, so one of the aspects of the Himalayan religion, or tradition, which I would consider more pagan, is the fact that every temple has what's called a gur, which is a kind of oracle. So it's these people who are selected usually by the deity, and it usually comes in the form of some kind of bizarre fit, I guess. It could be like epilepsy, or it looks like an epileptic fit or something, but usually it's believed that if someone has these kind of attacks or seizures, that they're being touched by the deity, and then they get sent to the temple and they become the voice of the deity. And um, and I have seen like various oracles go into a trance and do like an augury, and it can look very different depending on the deity. Like some deities, they really kind of, they get very worked up, and they do this whole dance with a sword, and you can recognize the oracles because they always have long hair. They never cut their hair, and they keep it up in a kind of a top knot, or sometimes a kind of ponytail at the back. But if they're doing an augury, they unbind their hair, which I always found really interesting when I thought of like how witches were always considered to have their power in their hair. Anyway, so they would do this augury, and some of the more peaceful deities, it would just be like they'd have their eyes closed and they'd be kind of mumbling. But some of the more wild deities would have oracles who would be shouting basically in tongues. And so one day I had gone to a temple to make an offering because I was grateful for something, and I like to sometimes go to temples and meditate, and sometimes I like to, if I feel inspired, I might make an offering. So I had gone to this one temple, and it was the temple of a confluence of two rivers. And when I went into the temple, I didn't expect that the guru would be inside, because usually they're not usually sitting in the temple very often. That's usually the high priest that does that. But the guru was in there, and he was like, "Oh, come and sit and have a cup of tea with me," and I was like, "Oh, great!" And so we were just chit chatting, and he was telling me a little bit about his life and how he hadn't expected to become a guru. He was prepared to be a manager in a factory, and then he got called, and he had to change his whole life. And I was fascinated because I had never spoken to a guru before, and I didn't realize what that must be like. Like it's a major life change, and then suddenly we're sitting there, and he just was like he just seems to pass out, and his eyes roll up in his head, and then he starts speaking, and he basically did a personal augury for me about my life, which was a little bit scary, actually. I won't give you all the details because it's a little bit personal, but it was very helpful. And and then he came out of it, and then he was so embarrassed. He was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I you come here to make an offering, and I go into this augury. I can't control it." And then he was like, "Let me make you another cup of tea. Do you want some biscuits? I'm really sorry." And it was a really fascinating experience, and I think that that's the only kind of semi-dramatic paranormal experience that I've had. I've never really seen a ghost, or I did see some kind of supernatural being when I was little, which I thought was a fairy, but I'm just going to say that on my channel, but I generally don't talk about that because people really think you're crazy. Like, it's one thing if you see ghosts, like, people might think you're crazy, but they might think that you're a little bit, like, lots of people believe in spirits and stuff, but believing in fairies is kind of like really out there. But I'm sure people just put it down to me being a little kid, and that's fine. So that is, as usual, I have told my story, and now I've gone blank, so I'm just going to leave it there, and I will, I gotta stop looking at myself. I will upload this now, and I hope that you guys find this interesting, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.